It so happened that as Zechariah was carrying out his priestly duties before God, working the shift assigned to his regiment, it came his one turn in life to enter the sanctuary of God and burn incense. The congregation was gathered and praying outside the temple at the hour of the incense offering. Unannounced, an angel of God appeared just to the right of the altar of incense. Zechariah was paralyzed in fear.
Do not fear, Zechariah. God has heard your prayer. Your wife Elizabeth will bear a son for you. You are to name him John. You have both walked blamelessly, and now you will have great joy, and many will rejoice at the birth of your son. For he will be great in the eyes of the Lord, and he will turn many people to the Lord.
This is impossible. Do you expect me to believe this? I'm an old man, and my wife is an old woman.
But the angel said, I stand before you in the very presence of God. It was him who sent me to tell you this good news. But because you won't believe me, you'll be unable to say a word until the day of your son's birth.
When Zechariah's week of service in the temple was over, he returned home. Soon afterward, his wife Elizabeth became pregnant and went into seclusion for 5 months.
How kind the Lord is! He has taken away my disgrace of having no children.
Good morning, everyone. I want to speak today about the 4 old people of Christmas. I was amazed that when you look at the characters that are discussed at any length in the story of Christmas, 6 of them, 4 of them were old. Zechariah, Elizabeth, Simeon and Anna. And at least 3 of those 4 had not had easy lives. The 4th one, we're not told about his life much. Zechariah and Elizabeth were childless in an age where that really mattered. People thought that if you were childless, you must have sinned. And so there was judgment and social stigma attached to this, and Elizabeth had really felt it as the woman was always the one who was blamed. Then we think about Anna, the old prophetess who lived in the temple. She had been married for 7 years as a teenager into her early 20s. She was now 84. She'd been widowed at the end of 7 years without children, a disaster for a woman because there was no way of earning a living outside of the home. And not only that, would a man take her after 7 years of not being able to produce a child? She was probably classed as barren. But she had taken her life into her own hands, felt the call of God, and she lived in the temple and prayed and fasted night and day for 60 years, and now she's 84. So she hasn't had an easy life either. Simeon we're not told anything about, except that he was righteous and devout and had received a promise from the Lord that he would not die until he'd seen the Messiah. But the eyes of God were on them, all of them. They were his people who walked in his ways. They were righteous and devout, and God had a plan to bless all 4 of them in their old age. Notice that. They were faithful people who hadn't allowed bitterness to creep in, and they were still faithfully serving God. Like many of the people who are here today, faithfully going on, carrying on, in spite of difficulties and disappointments. Just ordinary people. They were nobody to the rulers of Israel. They led small, circumscribed lives, just like us. Not many of us will lead armies, preach to thousands, win a Nobel Prize. And Paul said in Corinthians, "Consider your own call, brothers and sisters. Not many of you were wise by human standards. Not many were powerful. Not many were of noble birth. And by the time you've reached late middle age, you're resigned to the fact that many of your dreams aren't going to come true, that things aren't going to materialize. You're not the CEO of the company. You're not on the road to the Nobel Prize. And sometimes you've had grievous losses because life never ever turns out as you expect it to. Some people have lost children, the divorce you never saw coming, the business career that imploded. But God is kind, so kind. That's what I want to emphasize today. And He sometimes gives us encouragement along the way and strength for the journey. Dr. Larry Crabb tells a story about his father. Dad's life is a story of blessings mingled with great loss. He lost his father to the flu epidemic in 1917 when he was a 5-year-old child. He lost his oldest son, my only sibling, to a plane crash in 1991. He had earlier lost his only brother to cancer. In his elder years, he lost his wife to 6 years of advancing Alzheimer's. My father was a private man, British by background and temperament. But in one rare moment, then in his 80s, he quietly said to me, "My life was hard." But he never closed his Bible. He never stopped celebrating the Lord's Supper every Sunday. He struggled mightily, but never resisted and ran, never distorted and denied. Something survived in the deep places of his soul. My father fought the good fight. He finished the race. He remained faithful to the end. He trembled even on his deathbed, but he trusted. A decade before he died, he woke up suddenly from a sound sleep in the early hours of the morning with 2 words forcefully repeating themselves in his mind: sheer delight. God gave him a vision, the last of 3 he was given during his 84 years of following Jesus before he died. In this vision, my father saw his father, whom he had not seen for 70 years. "Papa," he asked, "what's it like up there?" He then heard his very alive father reply, "I don't want to ruin the surprise. It is good beyond telling." Dad went back to sleep. Whatever had survived in him up to that time gathered new strength as he faced his final years. God is kind. He's so kind. God was similarly kind to Anna and Simeon in extreme old age, to show them the Messiah that they had been looking for. I can think of no reason why Anna had to see the Messiah before she died. She was looking for his coming, that is true. Just the kindness of God, who decided he was going to show her that day in the temple. And Simeon, what joy when they saw Jesus in the temple that day, when Joseph and Mary brought that baby in. Now, getting back to Zechariah, his life had been hard. He was probably poor. He didn't live in Jericho or Jerusalem, where most of the priesthood lived, which implies that he may have been farming to earn a living to survive. And the priesthood in Jerusalem was corrupt. They were occupied by Rome. They were ruled by the terrible King Herod, and Herod appointed the high priests and so on. So the clergy was corrupt. So there was plenty to grieve his soul about what was going on. He belonged to the priestly order of Abijah, and that was the 8th of 24 orders, priestly orders. So because of that, they were only called up for 1 week every 6 months. Then in that 1 week, they would cast lots for whoever could be chosen. And you were only allowed to be chosen once in your entire life. After that, your name was never put in. So Zechariah's old, he's never had a chance before, and this day is his chance. The very day the angel Gabriel is coming to speak to him. Imagine the timing of that. God has perfect times, a perfect time in your life. Do you have any long-cherished dreams or secret desires that you've given up asking God for? Be assured that not one of your prayers goes unheard. We know that Elizabeth and Zechariah had been praying for a child because when the angel Gabriel appeared to Zechariah, when he went in to cast the incense, which was prayers rising up to God, when Gabriel saw Zechariah, he said to him his prayer had been heard. And then he said these kind words. Imagine how kind God is to add details like this. He will be a joy and a delight to you, the son I'm giving you, a joy and a delight. That God cared about something like that. And many will rejoice because of his birth. What did Zechariah do? From Zechariah's complete and utter stunned disbelief, he said, how can I be sure this will happen? We can assume he'd long ago stopped praying for a child. Not only that, he simply could not resist pointing out to Gabriel how old both he and Elizabeth were, as if Gabriel didn't know. He couldn't see past his age, and had in fact allowed his age to define and limit him and his thinking. We must be careful of that, of allowing things that we believe about ourselves to limit us. We say like, I'm not getting any younger. Things are never going to change. It'll always be this way. Why would God ever notice me? I'm so ordinary. No wonder Gabriel was annoyed and seemed to bristle in his reply. He said, I am Gabriel. I stand in the presence of God, and I've been sent to speak to you and bring you this good news. But now, because you did not believe my words, which will be fulfilled in their time, God isn't going to change his promise and not give him a child because he doesn't believe. You will become mute, unable to speak until the day these things occurred. And Zechariah was mute for the next 9 months and had plenty of time to think about how good God had been to him and how good God was. So that when the baby was born, he burst out into an absolute song of praise. God had his perfect time. The reason they had had to wait so long, they didn't know that the time of the Messiah had not arrived. John and Jesus had to be contemporaries because John was going to prepare the way for the Messiah. That was his great calling in life. Not only that, Elizabeth and Zechariah had only asked for a son, but God gave them the greatest Old Testament man of all time. He did so much more than they had asked for. Jesus said that there was none greater than John. And once she was pregnant, Elizabeth said, how kind the Lord is. He's taken away my disgrace of having no children. Notice the theme of the kindness of God. He's not an ogre, he's so kind. She was humble. When Mary came to visit her, she said, and why has this happened to me, that the mother of my Lord comes to me? God gave her an insight that Mary was carrying the Messiah, And it's the first time anyone called Jesus my Lord, almost like a conversion experience for Elizabeth. She was humble about that. She was a great encourager. The angel Gabriel, when he told Mary that she was pregnant, he gave her the information that Elizabeth was 6 months pregnant. They didn't live in the same towns. Mary hadn't known that. Why had God given Mary that information? Because there was nobody Mary could talk to. Her story was highly improbable, the kind of thing you get yourself locked up for insanity. And she wasted no time in traveling south to the little town in Judea where Elizabeth and Zachariah lived. And there she would get encouragement. There Elizabeth had the revelation of God, would take her seriously. And I am sure that over the next few months they prayed about what Mary would face when she went back and had to face Joseph, who was very shocked at the news and not at all happy. So there was a kindness of God to Mary. We all need encouragers in our lives, like Elizabeth, an older woman, was an encourager to Mary. And in fact, Elizabeth should have taken precedence. She was the older woman. But she said, why has this happened to me, that the mother of my Lord visits me? We never know what God is doing behind the scenes of our lives. And what life experiences He allows is preparation for the work He has called us to do, and what length of time we might have to make. Dr. Larry Townsend, I think it was an unconverted young man. He was at university and he wanted to play golf. And so he organized his university timetable around golf. And the only thing that fitted in with golf was New Testament Greek. So he took New Testament Greek. By the end of his first year, he had fallen in love with New Testament Greek more than he loved golf. So he carried on studying it. Then he went into business. And New Testament Greek is absolutely no help in selling insurance. So it was of no use to him. Then he got converted. Then he felt God was calling him to teach the Bible. And that New Testament Greek, which had been an apparent timetable clash all those years before, turned into a fruitful ministry at Dallas Theological Seminary. So we never know what God is doing behind the scenes in our lives, even in our pre-conversion experience. He is at work. Don't give up on your dreams. Don't stop asking God. He hears. He won't fail you. God is kind, so kind. And His eyes are turned towards you today. My husband and I, years ago, got ourselves into a lot of trouble through no fault of our own. In 1984, we got transferred to Johannesburg. We sold our house. The man who bought it was a difficult character, but anyhow, it seemed everything had gone through and the bank told us they'd passed the bond. So we went up to Johannesburg, had permission to buy another house, bought the other house. And this man just upped and off and moved out of the house. Before he refused to sign the bond, and Ian and I were in a lot of trouble. And the lawyers said it'll have to go to the Supreme Court. It can take 2 years. He has his own business. In that time, he can transfer everything into his wife's name. You won't get anything. And there we were stuck. The lawyers were dunning us for the bonds on 2 houses. And we were just a young married couple in our very early 30s with, at that stage, 2 very small children. And we were quite beside ourselves. Not only that, we just moved to Joburg. We didn't really have a lot of friends in Joburg. And I remember one day, it took months, this whole mess. And I remember one day Glenn Mackey, who is in your congregation here, came to visit us. He said, "You two looked so miserable in church on Sunday. I just wanted to come and encourage you." I've never ever forgotten that kind of encouragement. Anyhow, eventually our company said that the house in Somerset West had to be auctioned. Now you know what happens. We were going to lose a fortune and we just didn't have the money. We would have had to declare bankruptcy. The day before the house was going to be auctioned, I was sitting in the family room in our Johannesburg house, reading in 2 Kings chapter 6, where Elisha asked God to open his servants' eyes because they were surrounded by the enemy. When the servants' eyes were opened, he saw the horsemen and chariots of the Lord on the hills round about. And as I was sitting there, we had huge trees in the garden. I saw out of the side of my eye, didn't turn my head, I just knew they were there. There were angels over the tops of the trees. And I knew that God cared deeply for Ian and I. We were two very ordinary people, but heaven cared about what was happening to us. The whole burden just lifted. And I dashed out of the house to fetch the kids from playgroup, passed Ian on the road on the way home. We rolled down our windows, pulled up alongside each other, and I said, "It's going to be okay. I've really just heard from God." The next day the house was auctioned and it turned out we'd lost 60,000 rand. We're talking 1984, that was a lot of money. But it didn't worry me because I'd heard from God. The day after that, the company called Ian in. They'd never breathed a word of this before and said they didn't expect somebody to lose so heavily on a transfer and they were going to pay the whole amount. I'd had plenty of ideas during that time, suggestions I'd made to God how he could help us, but that was the only thing I'd never thought of. And God came through. Isn't that wonderful that he cares for people? And Patricia St. John, the author, she was a missionary in Morocco for years, and her sister was a missionary, a teacher in Lebanon during the Lebanese Civil War. She said Hazel's wartime adventures could fill a volume. One night in June 1976, when she had to leave East Beirut, she was staying in a blind school building in West Beirut. The American ambassador had been murdered in the street that week and a great deal of fighting was going on. She was alone that night on the 3rd floor, sleeping as very often on the floor to avoid bullets through the window. A car bomb went off in the street below and a neighboring building was hit. It seemed as if things were collapsing with a deafening noise all around. She prayed for protection, and then to try and drown the uproar, she switched on the battery radio on the floor beside her. There was no electricity at that time. With a 2-hour time difference, she struck the BBC 8:30 hymn singing, and a voice rang out clear and strong in the dark without any introduction. "My peace I give unto you, not as the world giveth, give I unto you. Let not your heart be troubled, neither let it be afraid." And it seemed exactly as if the Lord himself stood in the room. He comes to us in our troubles. He's with us. He sees what's happening to us and he cares. And he's kind. What dreams have died in you? What do you want him to do for you? Don't be afraid to ask because you feel forgotten. Reach out to him today and ask him to revive that which has died in you. There is power in God's kindness. It changes things, it redeems, it makes whole, and it gives new life. Remember, God is kind, 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 so kind.
Right now, a lot of us are probably in the space of rushing to get gifts for people, trying to figure out what to get people, because honestly, that is the dilemma most of the time. Like, what do we get people for Christmas? And you know what's special about Christmas gifts? Of course, the actual gift matters. It's wonderful when you get exactly something that you've been wanting or hoping for. But you know what makes a gift like that even more special? Is when you know that someone has actually spent money or saved up for it or sacrificed something else so that they can give you that special gift. And I do think God feels the same when we do something beautiful and sacrificial for Him or for people around us. And so I thought today, I want to encourage us, firstly, let's be faithful with our giving this season. But secondly, why don't we think of ways that we can sacrificially bless the people around us? Whether maybe you're thinking, I want to give towards church in a sacrificial way, or maybe you're thinking, hey, you know, I've got this neighbor and they've been talking about this thing, and actually I'm just going to go and get them that thing and bless them in a way that they're, you know, not expecting. And so let's think this season how we can really just use what we have and our resources, and let's be sacrificial in how we bless those around us this season. So if you would like to give today to tithes and offerings, the giving details will be on the screen. God bless you as you are generous this season.